Hello everyone, today I have got a DJI Osmo Action strapped onto my head, and so I'll be trying to show you what I do, what it looks like from my point of view when we are stringing a badminton racket. So here I have got a Yonex Astrox 88S with me, which was previously strung with the Yonex Aero Bite string. We're gonna replace it with Yonex BG80 in pink, and yeah, this was shot in October, so yeah, I thought we'd do something about it. And so I'm gonna try and do some commentary whilst I'm stringing to show you why I do certain things I do. Please feel free to comment, ask questions and things like that, and I will do my best to get back to you. So here we go. So to start with, I go through all the grommet checks, just visually checking if the grommets are actually okay. So by running my fingers through the frame, you can also feel if the frame has cracked or if there's any imperfections. You can check to see if the grommets are split on the inside or on the outside, making sure they're all okay. And if they're okay, that's absolutely fine. This one looks okay. So here I'm mounting it onto my machine from the 6 and 12 o'clock first, which also has the load spreaders. So making sure that they are actually seated properly on both the 6 and 12 o'clock section. And then my machine currently also has, if you're familiar with the forums, the Chudek side supports, which are absolutely amazing. So here I am trying to make sure that the side supports are sat perpendicularly onto the frame on each of the positions that they have. So on the bottom you have 4 and 8 o'clock, and on the top you have 10 and 2 o'clock. So here I'm just making sure that they are seated properly against the frame, making sure they have the same finger tightness. And also here I'm just trying to make sure there is no additional play after seating properly onto the frame. So here I am trying to set the tension that I want onto the racket. I want it on 28 on the mains and 30 on the cross. So I'm just setting that on the machine into the memory system to make sure that it is easier when I string. So I have my string on a reel. Typically for me it is 3 times end to end across my chest, so that should be around the 5 meters mark, which is suitable enough for me to finish stringing the mains and not waste too much string at the very end. So here we go. I first collect the 2 ends of the string, both onto my fingers, and then thread them across onto the 12 o'clock section of the frame, and then pulling them straight down all the way to the throat, which is 6 o'clock of the racket, making sure both ends are the same length, and then I pull them onto the base of the racket on the handle just to give a slight tension, so I'm able to clamp that first piece of string onto the stringing base. And now here I am making sure that it is seated properly, and the tension head has now pulled the first string whilst I thread the next holes across, and then clamp that piece of string. You can also see I hold the string behind the clamp right after the tangent head has been released. This is just to make sure that there are no slippage coming from the clamps as after the string has been released from the tension head. From here on, I also tend to pre-weave my mains down to B7, which is the 7th grommet on the bottom. This is just something I find that after stringing so many rackets, this is kind of the preferred workflow that I have. I tend to only do this for the mains. Make sure you skip the correct single pass grommets, as this is a Astrox 88S, so it will have 4 sets of single pass grommets on the top. Other rackets such as the Arcsaber 11 or Arcsaber 10s potentially have only 3 sets, so yes, make sure you skip the correct single pass grommets. So from here you can actually see I'm starting to tension the main strings. I tend to start tensioning 3 main strings aside just to start with, and then stopping at the 3rd main string, going back across to the left side as you can see here, and also doing 3 strings. Here I'm tensioning and then now repeating what I did initially, pre-weaving, so I'm letting the tension head hold for that little bit longer, clamping and then now releasing, checking sure there are no slippage coming from the clamps, and then pre-weaving down to B7. As you can actually see, each machine is slightly different, and some stringers will have a different workflow, working to one that they are used to and comfortable with. So there is no right or wrong in my opinion to pre-weave or not, especially for the mains. I would only do 1 ahead for the cross, as you will see later on. So here, as you can see, I'm starting to pull on the other side. You can also see my right hand now slightly tugging onto the loose string that is the pre-weaved string. That is to make sure that there is enough slack on the string that is actually not being tensioned, so that the tension head is actually tensioning the one correct string rather than both at the same time, giving a more accurate tensioning of that particular string. So now that I've come to the 4th main string on the left side, I now return to the original right side to continue stringing that, so we have even stringing on both sides of the racket, so that the racket doesn't come under uneven forces and pressures just on one side. I will then continue 1 ahead for every side until we finish this main side of the racket. So here we've gotten to the first hole that we've skipped early on with the single pass grommet, and here you can actually see me inserting a small piece of string onto the skipped single pass. This will actually save you a lot of hassle if you do actually come across a blocked single pass, which you struggle to lift or push down according to whichever way the string is blocked. So actually putting this piece of little string onto your skipped single pass would save you a lot of hassle in the future. Z. Now that we've come all the way down to B9 as per Yonex instructions, we're gonna go skip all the way to B12 and then to A16, popping back down at A14, and down at B10, which is then to tie off at B8. So yes, so you can refer these instructions on the Yonex website. I will put a link down below. Yonex tends to have 3 sets of different stringing instructions based on whichever racket it is, depending if it has 3 single pass sets of grommets or 4 or none. And generally they are adaptable to other makes of rackets as well, although it is really good to refer to whichever make the racket is from and refer to their stringing instructions for longevity and also protection of the rackets that you are stringing with. So here you can actually also still see that I am looping little bits of string onto every single skipped hole that I have done. You will have also noticed that I have set the tension up to 30 and I have pulled the last 2 strings at once, meaning I did not pull the most outer string, the one that is shortest nearest to the frame, whereas I have looped them over and pulled them all together at once, although I pulled them twice. The reason being at a higher tension is because when we come down from B10 all the way to B8 to tie the knot off, there's a certain section of string that is not tensioned. So to try and minimize tension loss, we try and just up the tension ever so slightly to the crosses tension, and then we tie it off at B8. You can also see that I am now repeating the same process on the right side of the racket, on the other side, pulling twice onto the final main string before clamping it. You will also see that I would only use a string puller to pull the B8 string towards the T joint of the racket, and then pulling a string through for my finishing knot. My finishing knot is a combination of the knots that I have learned previously in the past. I will post a video in the future about how I do my finishing knots as well as my starting knots, as currently trying to commentate on the knots that I use is impossible from the angles that we are actually seeing. And perhaps we need a slow-mo or a better angle in the future, and I will do that. You might probably also see stringers who start weaving their crosses before they finish off their mains. That is absolutely fine. It is just a different workflow for each stringer. And absolutely completely fine. I finish off my mains before starting on my crosses. For crosses, they tend to use slightly less string than the mains. For the mains, I tend to use 3 lengths across my chest end to end. For crosses, tend to only use about 2.6 lengths, with more than enough room for me to weave one ahead all the way to the very end. For this racket, Astrox 88S, we start at B6 and the first cross string would go into B9. And as we're weaving across to pop out on the other side of the B9, I make sure that the string coming out, the first cross string coming out from B9 is underneath all the main strings that was around B9. And so when I push into B10 using the string puller to pull the main string into it, I then made sure that it is aligned as the bottom string when it goes into it as a second cross. However, I think here I've realized that I've made a mistake, and so we're taking it all out and trying to do the reweave. You will also notice that after weaving, when I'm pulling my string across, I will push the slack string with my right hand in this case, so that I don't pull the string directly across and cause string burn from where the first cross will lay, So yeah, I think that's quite a crucial thing to do, so you do not reduce the durability of your string that you are stringing with, and do not cause string burn. So this one again, when I'm pushing out, I make sure that the second cross is coming back out underneath all of the main string, so that when we finish stringing, they are all aligned properly and do not have any crossovers from the shared grommets. So here I am pre-weaving my third string across, and I will do so for the first 4 cross strings. Again, same, I am trying to make sure that they are aligned on the bottom, onto the third string, using the string puller just to pull it to make sure that the cross string can get across, weaving my final 4th string and doing the same to release the other side, and I think we are ready to tension. So here we go. As before, similar to how I finish my both main strings, I tend to pull first two cross strings together instead of pulling directly on the first one. Previously I did pull directly on the first main string. Now I tend to do 2 at once, because I didn't see there was a need to exert this much pressure on the starting knot. Although none of my starting knots ever failed, but there was no need to do that, and then I did not feel there was a diminishing return in performance in terms of feel or tension loss. So definitely okay for me to do that. Also, just to add on, ever since I started pulling my last 2 mains at once, along with first starting cross as well as my finishing cross strings, pulling the last 2 at once, I noticed there was a considerable increase in durability and string breaks from both players who have strung rackets for, as well as myself, as I think it's slightly more forgiving ever so slightly at the edges of the racket. If you do pull 2 strings at once, you might have a slight percentage of tension loss, but if it increases the durability of the string pattern holding, if you do a miss hit on the edge or the corner of your racket, then I believe that is actually okay. One of the best things that I have learnt that saved me a lot of time whilst especially stringing the cross strings is actually holding the tip of the string that we are weaving with my left pinky. So actually, you will actually see that I tend to just hold on to the edge of the string with my left hand on my pinky fingers, and that way every time when I'm ready to weave, I don't actually need to go and look for the string. It is always there, and yeah, I believe that is quite a big time saver. Try it if you think it is useful for yourself. Let me know in the comments below and see if you have any other tips or tricks that actually saves you time when you're stringing. So I'm just here going through all the cross strings. I pre-weave 1 ahead and then tension, and then repeating that process again. Once I've pre-weaved that tensioned and pull, I try and align it as straight as possible before clamping it, and then releasing the tension head and repeating that process again. Pre-weaving 1 ahead will get you I think it's called a soft weave. Then what it means is it's much easier to weave 1 ahead instead of weaving directly the exact one that you are about to string, which I believe is actually called a hard weave. So give it a try and see how it feels. Let me know again in the comments below if you have any other weaving techniques that we can all learn from. Also, my weaving technique is just, I think, 2 of my index fingers, both left and right hand index fingers, almost on the edge, and I think try and be as relaxed as possible instead of squeezing really hard onto the string and trying to push it across. So I try and be as relaxed as possible, and I think that helps me weave as smoothly as possible. I think obviously what type of string you use does does affect the ability to weave really smoothly. So for example, like the 66 Ultramax, 66 Force, I find them really easy to weave with. Strings that are also stiffer, I find them also quite easy to weave. Strings that are actually really rough and they do bite on each other really hard, they tend to get a bit more challenging, but it is not impossible. So yes, I think stringing does involve a lot of patience, so you do need a lot of patience as you are repeating a lot of steps, basic steps, but plenty of times. So yes, so do have patience and practice, and it will all come. As you can see, I think sometimes strings do get tangled up ever so slightly. So yeah, just take your time, release them, and try and straighten them as much as you can, and then go through it again. So here I am trying to push through on, I think that would be a 16, which is a shared hole for the mains and the cross strings. So I was using the string puller to pull the mains string onto the 12 o'clock direction of the racket, so to have a gap for the cross strings to come through, and because it is actually in the same location as where the side supports are, so sometimes it gets a bit tricky, but it's okay. Just have patience, and again repeating the same, using the string puller to pull the main string up towards the center of the racket so that it has a little gap. It makes a little gap for the cross strings to go through, especially when you're stringing at quite a high tension. They do get a bit tough, so yeah, so do have some patience and they should all come through. So we are now getting onto the first block toe that we have, and so having actually earlier put that little string onto the blocked section, it was very easy just to pull the string up, to lift the mains blocked string, and so enabling us to actually stress-free, hassle-free to push the cross string across, and making sure again I put them underneath the main string so they don't twist when we are actually pulling the tension across. So yeah, so here we go. And one thing that you will find is with slightly cheaper machines, I think the ergonomics isn't as good as the high-end top-tier machines, and so sometimes your string will catch on knobs or the side supports. So just make sure you check to make sure so that the string doesn't loop across any of the knobs or side supports, and especially not when you're pulling tension, so the string doesn't break. Yeah, so it's just little things to look out for. probably one of the most frustrating things you'll find is when you've gotten all the way to your last few cross strings and then you realize there's a mistake somewhere and you have to redo the whole racket again. I believe this will have happened to any experienced stringer before in their stringing lifetime. It has definitely happened to me before, but it's better to get it right than just leave it as a mistake. So yeah, we learn from that, and so yeah, we'll just make sure we keep looking out for it and have patience. So now we are getting to the second set of blocked holds, which are really tight. So I use a starting clamp to help leverage the tiny piece of string and lift up the string the main string that is blocking the shared holes. And that makes life quite a lot easier, instead of having to figure out a way using your string puller or using an awl to actually try and push or pull the blocked main string across the blocked hole, which then risks breaking that main string, especially if you're stringing at higher tensions. So this method saves you a lot of hassle, saves you a lot of time down the line when you actually do put them in at the beginning. So we are now down to our last two cross strings and our final set of blocked mains string holes. So yeah, again I'm gonna use the same technique that I did, leveraging using the starting clamp on the little piece of string that we put on earlier, and that gets me easily through to be able to weave across. So this final hole is slightly more challenging because you're limited for space on the bottom of the racket as well as on the top of the racket. So sometimes, yeah, just a needle nose plier might help. And then also, again, trying to release the string using the starting clamp. As you can actually see, sometimes it is also still challenging with a piece of little string that you've inserted, but do have some patience and ultimately it will come out okay. And once that is okay, I then pull both last string, as I said before, at the same time. I double pull it just to make sure that we minimize as much tension loss as possible before finishing them off on the correct hole. And as you can see here, my usual fixed clamps are not able to fit into that gap with the load spreaders around. So instead I used a Yonex flying clamp on that side, which isn't absolutely perfect in an ideal world, but they do the job pretty well actually. So yes, like I mentioned early on, at higher end, more expensive machines, they do have better ergonomics and better clearances and better design, which allows you more freedom and to be able to string with ease slightly better. But yes, more basic machines are also quite good when you're starting out, and also being able to practice your techniques and also having patience as well. So as you can actually see, the machine that I'm actually currently using is a Pros Pro TX 700. The racket mounting system is exactly the same as it was before, whereas the tension head has been upgraded to the WISE 2086 tension head. Yes, the side supports are actually slightly different, as I mentioned at the start, with the Chudek side supports, which are actually really good. So now that we're done with the racket, we are releasing it. So I release it from the 10 and 12 position first, and then moving on to the 10, 2 o'clock side supports before finishing off at the 4 and 8 o'clock supports. You will also be able to tell that I have only used 4 hand tools for stringing this whole racket: a needle nose plier, a pair of scissors, as well as the starting clamp, and also the string puller. So I'm just doing some final visual checks on the racket, and it looks like there are no crossovers on the outside as well of the strings, so they do look okay. I am attaching another video that shows a better angle about what I mean by no crossovers on the outside of the racket, especially on the bottom 4 and 8 o'clock, as well as 10 and 2 o'clock of the racket. So yeah, any comments, please comment down below, and see you in the next one. So we are now getting to the second sets of blocked holes, which are really tight, and so hence I use a string puller